I'm laughing. I'll do one more, and then we'll go out and I'll begin my investigative journalism in Corpus Christi. I looked for the Kohler Times article. Now, the last article that I remember about Robert Mueller was from the Kohler Times, and it said, "A man of integrity." Now, I actually searched for it, but the Kohler Times online says, "You have had your 10 free articles for the month, so pay." Pay for what? Pay for stuff I can access on KIII, KRS, KZT. But it was interesting because out of all the critique you would do, if you were real journalism, you would have critiqued some of this. Now, it's interesting. I can't do it all. But you'll notice that it's actually one of the New York Times articles, which I used to buy the New York Times hard copy and read it at fire department. It's very big, long paper. But it was interesting because out of all of their critique of whatever they're going to try to expose as journalism, their opinion about all of this is that Mr. Mueller is a man of integrity. A few things to remember as I read all this news. A few times when the congressional committees, a Representative Jimenez, meaning our leadership in this country, there were times where they actually began trying to get some of the information from the FBI, from the Department of Justice, in this whole process. Now, there were some times, including the Democratic Houseman Adam Schiff, congressman that's on the Democratic side of all these investigations, and a few times when they requested, we want to look into some of this stuff that seems highly political, Mr. McCabe committing crimes, and Mr. Comey. At this point, yes. And then they began asking, and with the Democrats on the committee, as well as the FBI and DOJ, Department of Justice, what they began saying was, if we release this particular memo, or if we release whatever it is, it will cause grave damage to the country. Okay, so the Kohler Times, because they're on that, they're in the same viewpoint. Yes, it would be devastating. It would cause the downfall of the country if we release whatever this information was at that time. Then about 2 weeks later, it got released. The only thing that they were trying to cover up for was wrongdoing that they were doing. It had nothing to do with actually what they said. So now you see the people behind the scenes covering up for themselves because there were so many lines that they crossed. And anybody, liberal, Democrat, any true journalism, would want to show that. But that's how politics are. That's how media is. They don't want to show what they feel would hurt their particular cause, whatever it is. Now, this whole story I've been uploading today, some of the various news sites, it was actually people from within the government deep state that initially started coming out and giving their narrative, their story, ahead of time, because they realized for the first time in many, many years, the country and the people have questions about people that are in authority. Now, whether that be on a national level, FBI, Justice Department, whether it's local level, people began questioning, wait a minute, a lot of this looks shady. Now, I can read, and I can read from sources that are reputable, all right? Washington Post, New York Times, and a lot of this began rolling the last 8 days or so from Kimberly Strassel, I guess, Washington Post. And so what you have are people that have sides to things. and that they don't want to. I would have never called Mr. Mueller. Remember this local community: Nick Jimenez, Tom Whitehurst, and the Kohler Times believe all of this stuff represents a man of integrity. I posted the Patriot Dad's website the other day, and he documented crimes by some of the judges in this community. Names that I've called out before. And according to the way the Kohler Times, Nick Jimenez, and Tom Whitehurst, according to their standard of journalism, they also have covered up for those guys as men of integrity. And as I look at the scene, I do recognize they do that for the basic idea of La Raza, which is, in order for your particular ethnicity to succeed, you feel it's important to cover up for corruption and criminality, even in your own city. That's the only thing I can imagine, because many of these, I posted something from El Defensor, and you say, John, you're just an Anglo. No, El Defensor, I like Homer Villarreal. I used to read the hard copy paper of El Defensor at the fire department. And if it's like a political thing, but very strong Hispanic activism, all right? But he even had something on Mauricio Celis. I didn't watch it. I guess it was videos. I reposted that. Celis was the man that was connected to corrupt drug laundering directly at money laundering directly out of Mexico, with connections, well-known connections to Judge Vinales. And Judge Vinales, when Mr. Mauricio Celis, they couldn't nab him on the very long case of money laundering. It went to our local courts here. But once it got into Mr. Judge Vinales' Manuel Vinales' court, I read a San Antonio article and all. He did corrupt things to cover up for somebody that was giving him cash. Now, any reputable newspaper, like the San Antonio or even the Texas Ag paper I posted, you would have exposed that. You would have exposed that. But yet, like Mr. Mueller, to you is a man of integrity. So also to the corrupt judges who are criminals, not all of them, but to those that are, you also cover up for that. And you are doing all of that because you're corporate paid media, and you also have connections in this community. And maybe you sit down in the long-term families, Hispanic, wonderful families, been here for many years, but some of them have those connections. And you go to the taqueria and you eat I love Mexican food. And so it's sort of like, yeah, we know we're criminals. We know we cover up for our criminals. And that's the media. That's the media. And the reason some of this started coming out, the spy, the name of that intelligence source, it's already been out. It's already been out. And Mr. Mark Warner said, we'll go after you. Expose this criminality. So I knew, as I watched this over the last 6 months, that they're basically covering up. They didn't want to release particular information to Devin Nunes and others, because once it finally came out, it wasn't what they said. They said it's going to be the downfall of our country. And all of the media said that. All of the media said that. The liberal media. And then when it was released, what did that same media say? Some of this like stuff. Then they said, oh, it's a nothing burger. So the same media, the same Democrats who said, Mr. Warner types, Adam Schiff types, if you release this evidence that the Congress is wanting to look at, the representatives of the people, if they feel there's shady stuff going on, and if we actually release it, it will be the downfall of our, this is the Mr. Comeys, the Mr. McCabe's, the Lisa Pages, the Robert Muellers. And then when it was released, it was nothing, but it exposed that they were just hiding up for this stuff behind the scenes. And I don't need Mr. Trump's tweet that says worse than Watergate for me to see that this certainly is. Because It's people that have been around for a long time in these positions. And then our country was embroiled in an election. And there was a common theme amongst many Republicans and Democrats that Mr. Trump, this guy's a joke, he's never going to make it in. Okay, I understood all that. I really didn't support Mr. Trump. And then after he got elected, all of this stuff they felt would never come out. They just assumed that Mrs. Clinton was going to get elected. Most of the media, most of the polls honestly believed that. So they figured if they did a lot of this stuff, it would never be exposed. Okay? Yes. Okay, I'm doing the video. But surprisingly, Trump got elected. And then a lot of this continued to go on. There should be very high standards. If you are a true journalist, if you are a true media, you question those in power. And what you have done, Caller Times, and many in the media, you have not spoken truth to power. You have not. Because that mindset that said, this man will never be in. And then he gets in. And also it'll be the destruction of the society, not realizing all of this stuff that you've really covered up for. If any one of these things were done against Mr. Obama, any one of them, if you had a Republican president and he was supporting the Republican nominee against Mr. Obama, and then his own attorney general meets with the husband of that nominee on the tarmac, which was the Loretta Lynch thing, that one thing would have been enough for but you've had so many corrupt things that have gone on. And you have failed in journalism completely. Many on the inside felt just some of the crimes that we have seen, just some of the simple things that we have seen by the investigators. Some are familiar with, some are not. Just any one of those would have been enough for a citizen to face severe charges. As a matter of fact, that's many of the charges that they managed to get against various people, just if you lied. And these guys have been lying, the McCabe things, and the Clappers and the John Brennans. And at the same time, and the James Comeys, I remember their tweets, the truth will come out. John Brennan said, you will fall in the dustbin of history. And I gave a tweet on I commented on Brennan's Twitter account. I said, you are an utter disgrace. Do you think that the citizens of this country, and there was the Samantha Power, the former UN lady under Obama, and she came out and said publicly, oh, don't mess with John Brennan, referring to Mr. Trump. And then Mr. Schumer, the Democrat out of New York, said, if you mess with the intelligence agencies, they have 6 ways from Sunday to get you. Meaning, don't forget, we're criminals, we're corrupt, and the Caller Times and the media, they like that. They like that. Because it serves their political purpose. So whatever I title this one, I want all the local community to know that not only has our local media covered for this corruption and praised Mr. Mueller as a man of integrity, but they've also done the same with this county. They've done the same with judges that others have documented criminal activity. And they have praised those judges and covered up for them. So my 10 views of the Caller Times were up, which was probably good. Because you're not media. You're a sham. You're a sham. You should have done some type of investigative journalism to the point where you recognize anybody would know that it's highly questionable that you had sources, whether you call them spies or not. I don't think Mr. Trump is doing his tweets because there was somewhat of a revolution that took place in the campaign, and Mr. Trump was correct about it. And Newt Gingrich also mentioned it in the past. Said the way we're going to get our side of the story out in this new technological revolution we live in, like I'm speaking, he says it's going to be done through online media and so forth, Twitter and all. Now, tweets are short things, but what this has enabled, in the past, the Comeys, the Muellers, the Kohler Times, they ran and pumped into the country whatever they wanted and said, we're just going to sit back and do what we want to do. Now, the tweets are short, and they are getting points out. They're bringing things to the public consciousness. And so I think somebody might be writing them along with Trump. And then how do I know? Because the media then began questioning that about 2 weeks ago. And then what happened was Trump put a tweet out and it was misspelled. And the media is so stupid, they fell for it and said, oh, but he corrected the tweet. No, they had to do that to show, oh, and I'm not saying he doesn't ever do his own tweets, but they knew that there was a certain side that they could present, and that's how they're doing it. And I think it's good that they're doing it that way. So instead of people having to wait for the hard paper to come out the whole time, you can learn. You can educate yourself. Even if one of these atrocities took place under an Obama administration, meaning you take one of them, you would have resignations, impeachments, and imprisonments. But it's because of the way the media is. They've empowered the Mr. Senator Warners, saying, if you release the name of a person who was making contact with low-level people in a set-up sting that resulted in charges and the possible impeachments, but it was done unjustly. For all of you that are in these spy agencies, or even good people that are undercover cops or whatever, and many are Christians, and they think the practicing of deception, like, I'll pretend I'm not, but I'm really gathering information, even in our own country. You are doing things that possibly could send you to hell because you practice in deceit. You say, but isn't there a scriptural basis for us? No, there isn't. We have some famous stories about spies in the Old Testament, no? But no, as people of integrity, which Mr. Comey, Mr. Clapper, and Mr. Brennan, you are not. Because you showed openly lies, falsehoods. Now, we could have forgiven for those things. But then that same group has been bringing charges against citizens, Flynn or whoever, Papadopoulos. And they're doing it for a motivation to get the big shot, which was that federal judge out of Virginia said in the Manafort case. You say, well, yeah, we do lie, we do cheat, we do steal, but we have this might very well send you to hell. You know, Mr. Comey, I'm a reader of history, and I'm a reader of news. He's a Catholic man. And in the Northeast, I forget, he used to attend a church. And James Comey's very tall, like 6'7", and his family's tall, which is fun. But do you know the people in that Catholic church, beautiful Catholic church up in the Northeast, they used to complain because Comey would sit in the front pew. And some of the other people were like, you know, but he wanted the front pew. And even though they knew, you know, you're kind of blocking the view, for my Catholic friends, you know, we want to access the sacramental grace of the sacrament. No, Comey's up there. This is true. Because it was a show. I'm in the front today. Integrity is you don't do all this. Integrity is you don't leak secretly notes to a friend of yours to begin investigation because your feelings were hurt. Secretly. And I understand you all feel that all of that is justifiable. It certainly is not. It certainly is not. So this will be titled something like the Kohler Times believes, something of that nature. Because this media does the same thing. This media does the same thing. All right. Now I begin my investigation. I'm going to be on the street journalism today. As a citizen, we have the right to do citizens' arrests. We have the right to do what God has told us to do. So, if I have to interview somebody today, or Mr. Jimenez or Kohler Times, there's public records of where everybody lives, and you guys are reporters. You walk up to people all the time with cameras sticking them in their faces. So it's possible that I'll do an interview with Nick. These are no threats. Mr. Whitehurst, I'm somewhat familiar with your background. That'll be the title. Will we have on-the-scene interviews, legal, no threats, with Tom Whitehurst, Nick Jimenez, or other figures in this community? That'll be the next.